Think your modern winter gear is impressive? Viking warriors were conquering the North Atlantic in open boats over 1,000 years ago, facing temperatures that would send today's sailors running for heated cabins. These Norse seafarers didn't just survive the brutal cold, they thrived in it, building an empire that stretched from Greenland to Constantinople. Today, we're discovering 7 ingenious Viking techniques that kept these legendary warriors warm enough to raid, trade, and explore the world's most dangerous waters. Get ready to discover survival wisdom that could transform how you handle winter's worst challenges. Viking layering systems, the original technical clothing. The Vikings didn't just throw on whatever animal skins they could find and hope for the best. They developed sophisticated layering systems that would impress modern outdoor gear companies. These weren't random clothing choices, they were engineered survival systems tested in some of the world's harshest conditions. The foundation of Viking warmth started with their undergarments. Vikings wore thin linen shirts directly against their skin, a choice that modern science validates completely. Linen naturally wicks moisture away from the body, preventing the deadly combination of sweat and cold that could kill a warrior faster than any enemy sword. Archaeological evidence from Viking burial sites shows these linen undergarments were often reinforced at stress points, indicating they were designed for active use, not just comfort. Over this base layer, Vikings added woolen tunics and trousers. But this wasn't just any wool. It was specially prepared using techniques that maximized its insulating properties. Viking women would spin wool into incredibly dense fabrics, sometimes incorporating animal hair from sheep, goats, and even dogs to create custom blends for different weather conditions. The wool was often left slightly oily from the lanolin, creating a natural water-resistant barrier that modern outdoor companies spend millions trying to replicate with synthetic treatments. The outer layer completed their system with leather or specially treated cloth garments that served as windbreakers and rain protection. Vikings developed a technique for treating leather with fish oils and tree resins that made it nearly waterproof while maintaining flexibility. When waves crashed over their longships, these outer garments shed water like a duck's back, keeping the insulating layers underneath dry and functional. What made this system truly brilliant was its modularity. A Viking could add or remove layers based on activity level and weather conditions. During intense rowing or combat, they might strip down to just the linen base and wool mid-layer. When standing watch on a freezing night, they'd add every layer plus additional cloaks and furs. This adaptability meant Vikings could maintain optimal body temperature regardless of what the North Atlantic threw at them. Modern outdoor enthusiasts pay hundreds of dollars for layering systems that follow the exact same principles Vikings perfected over a millennium ago. The only difference is that Vikings couldn't return their gear if it failed. Failure meant death in the icy waters of the North Sea. The Viking head and extremity protection strategy. Vikings understood something that modern medicine has proven. You lose up to 40% of your body heat through your head and extremities. Their approach to protecting these critical areas was both practical and ingenious, combining function with the fierce aesthetic that made them legendary. Viking helmets weren't just for battle protection. They were sophisticated cold weather gear. Contrary to popular images of horned helmets, real Viking headgear featured practical designs with ear flaps, neck guards, and sometimes even face masks for extreme conditions. These helmets were often lined with wool or fur, creating insulated air pockets that trapped warm air around the head. Some helmets featured adjustable ventilation holes that could be opened during physical activity and closed during rest periods. Underneath their helmets, Vikings wore close-fitting wool caps that covered their ears completely. Archaeological finds show these caps were often knitted in complex patterns that created extra thickness around the ears and back of the neck, the areas most vulnerable to frostbite. The knitting techniques used created fabric with tiny air pockets that provided superior insulation compared to simple woven cloth. Viking hand protection went far beyond simple mittens. They developed a sophisticated system of hand coverings that balanced warmth with the dexterity needed to handle weapons, ropes, and oars. The basic system started with thin wool liner gloves that provided base insulation. Over these, they wore leather mittens with individual finger sections that could be folded back when fine motor control was needed. For extreme conditions, they added outer mittens made from sealskin or other waterproof materials. The most ingenious aspect of Viking hand protection was their use of hand warmers. They would heat small stones or pieces of metal in their cooking fires, wrap them in cloth, and carry them inside their mittens. This provided hours of supplemental heat that could mean the difference between functional hands and frostbitten stumps. Some Vikings even developed special pockets in their mittens designed specifically to hold these primitive hand warmers. Viking footwear represented perhaps their greatest cold weather innovation. They wore multiple layers of socks made from different materials, thin wool next to the skin, followed by thicker wool or fur socks for insulation. Their boots were marvels of medieval engineering, featuring waterproof leather outers, insulating fur linings, and even primitive tread patterns carved into the soles for better grip on icy ship decks. The most remarkable Viking foot warming technique involved heated insoles. They would create thin leather pouches filled with heated sand or small stones, which they'd place inside their boots before long voyages. These insoles provided steady heat for hours and could be reheated whenever the ship made landfall. Modern battery-powered heated insoles work on the same principle Vikings mastered with nothing but fire and ingenuity. Viking nutritional warfare against the cold. Vikings understood that staying warm wasn't just about what you wore, it was about what you ate. They developed a sophisticated understanding of how different foods could generate internal heat, turning their diet into a weapon against the brutal cold of northern seas. The Viking approach to cold weather nutrition started with their famous preserved meats. While most people think of Viking preserved fish and meat as simple survival food, these items were actually carefully selected for their heat-generating properties. The high protein content in dried fish, salted pork, and smoked meats required significant energy to digest, creating internal heat that could last for hours. Vikings would increase their protein consumption by up to 50% during winter voyages, understanding instinctively what modern nutritionists have proven scientifically. Spices played a crucial role in Viking cold weather survival, though not the spices you might expect. Vikings had access to wild herbs and plants that created genuine warming effects in the body. They used liberal amounts of wild garlic, which increases blood circulation and creates a warming sensation. Juniper berries, common in Scandinavian forests, were chewed during cold weather for their warming properties and vitamin C content that prevented scurvy during long voyages. The Vikings' relationship with alcohol and warmth was more sophisticated than the simple drink rum to stay warm approach of later sailors. They understood that while alcohol created an immediate sensation of warmth, it actually made the body lose heat faster. Instead, they used alcohol strategically. Small amounts mixed with hot water and honey to create warming drinks that provided genuine heat without the dangerous side effects of straight alcohol consumption. Viking hot beverages were legendary among medieval travelers. They created complex herbal teas using combinations of local plants that provided both warmth and medicinal benefits. These drinks often included pine needle tea, rich in vitamin C, mixed with honey, and sometimes small amounts of fermented beverages. The hot liquid provided immediate warming, while the herbs offered long-term health benefits that kept Vikings fighting fit through brutal winters. Perhaps most importantly, Vikings mastered the art of communal eating as a warming strategy. Their famous feasting halls weren't just about celebration, they were survival tactics. Large groups eating hot food together created warm microclimates that could raise the effective temperature by 10 to 15 degrees. The combination of body heat from gathered people, steam from hot food, and the metabolic warming from eating created oases of warmth that sustained entire communities through the darkest winter months. Vikings also developed sophisticated food timing strategies for cold weather voyages. They would consume their largest, hottest meals just before the coldest parts of the day, typically in the late afternoon before night watches began. This provided maximum internal heat during the most dangerous hours. Those standing night watch received smaller portions of high-energy foods every few hours, not just for nutrition, but as portable internal heating systems that kept them functional through freezing nights. Viking fire mastery, controlled heat on wooden ships. Creating fire on a wooden ship surrounded by flammable materials required skills that separated Viking masters from amateur sailors. Vikings developed fire management techniques so advanced that some of their methods weren't matched by other maritime cultures for centuries. The centerpiece of Viking shipboard heating was their portable firebox system. These weren't simple metal containers. They were sophisticated heating devices that maximized heat output while minimizing fire risk. Viking fireboxes featured multiple chambers that allowed for controlled airflow, creating hotter, more efficient fires that produced less smoke and fewer dangerous sparks. The boxes were often lined with specially selected stones that absorbed heat during active burning and continued radiating warmth for hours after the fire died down. Vikings became masters of fuel selection for shipboard fires. They understood that different materials burned with different heat outputs and risk levels. Hardwoods, like oak and ash, provided long-burning, steady heat, perfect for overnight warming. Softwoods, like pine, created quick, hot fires ideal for cooking or rapidly warming chilled crew members. Most ingeniously, Vikings learned to use whale oil and seal fat as fuel sources that burned cleanly and provided intense heat without the spark danger of wood fires. The positioning of fires on Viking ships followed strict protocols developed through deadly trial and error. Fireboxes were always placed on beds of sand or stone, never directly on wooden decks. They were positioned in areas with maximum ventilation to prevent smoke buildup, but protected from wind that could spread sparks. Vikings developed rotating fire watch duties where experienced crew members monitored fires constantly, understanding that a moment's inattention could destroy the entire ship and crew. Viking heating extended beyond simple fireboxes to include heated object systems that would impress modern engineers. They would heat weapons, tools, and specially shaped stones in their fires, then distribute these heated objects throughout the ship to create multiple warming zones. A heated sword blade wrapped in cloth could warm a sleeping area for hours. Heated cooking pots filled with sand became portable heaters that could be moved wherever warmth was most needed. The most sophisticated Viking heating technique involved their use of thermal mass. They would build up large fires during the day, heating stones and metal objects to extremely high temperatures. These heated masses were then carefully distributed throughout the ship, creating a network of heat sources that could keep the entire crew warm through the night without maintaining active fires. This technique required precise timing and temperature management, skills that took years to master, but could mean the difference between life and death during Arctic voyages. Vikings also developed emergency heating protocols for extreme situations. When storms made normal fires impossible, they had backup systems, including chemical heating methods using quicklime and water reactions, and even techniques for creating heat through controlled fermentation of organic materials. These emergency methods weren't comfortable or pleasant, but they provided enough heat to prevent death from hypothermia when all other options failed. Viking movement and exercise. Active warming strategies. Vikings understood that a moving body is a warm body, and they developed exercise and activity systems that kept their crews warm, even in the most brutal conditions. These weren't random activities. They were carefully designed warming protocols that maintained fighting effectiveness while generating life-saving heat. The foundation of Viking active warming was their rowing system. Viking longships were designed so that rowing provided maximum full-body exercise, engaging arms, legs, back, and core muscles simultaneously. During cold weather, Vikings would implement rotating rowing schedules that kept every crew member actively generating heat throughout the day. Even when wind conditions were favorable for sailing, Vikings would often continue rowing in shifts, purely for the warming benefits. Viking ships featured exercise areas specifically designed for cold weather conditioning. These spaces, usually located in the most protected parts of the ship, allowed crew members to perform warming exercises even during storms. Vikings developed compact workout routines that could be performed in minimal space, body weight exercises that generated maximum heat with minimum risk of injury on a moving ship. Combat training served dual purposes in Viking cold weather survival. Daily weapons practice wasn't just about maintaining fighting skills. It was a systematic warming program that kept every muscle group active. Vikings would intensify their training schedules during cold spells, understanding that vigorous sword work, axe throwing, and wrestling could raise body temperature by 10 to 15 degrees within minutes. The most successful Viking crews were often those that maintained the most rigorous training schedules during winter voyages. Vikings pioneered what modern fitness experts call interval warming, short bursts of intense activity, followed by brief rest periods. This technique maximized heat generation while preventing exhaustion that could be dangerous in emergency situations. A typical Viking warming session might include 2 minutes of intense rope climbing, followed by 1 minute of rest, repeated for 15 to 20 minutes. This created sustained warming that lasted for hours after the exercise ended. The Vikings' famous berserker warriors may have developed their legendary fighting fury partly as a cold weather survival technique. The intense physical and mental state associated with berserker rage generated enormous amounts of body heat and adrenaline that could keep a warrior warm and functional, even in freezing conditions. While the psychological aspects of berserker behavior remain mysterious, the physical warming benefits were undeniably effective. Vikings also developed group warming activities that built crew cohesion while generating heat. These included competitive games, synchronized exercises, and even elaborate dances that got entire crews moving together. The famous Viking war dances weren't just ceremonial, they were practical warming techniques that could raise the temperature of an entire ship's crew within minutes. Viking shelter and microclimate creation. Vikings became masters at creating warm microclimates within the harsh environment of their ships and temporary camps. They understood that controlling airflow, trapping body heat, and creating insulated spaces could dramatically improve survival odds in extreme cold. The design of Viking longships included sophisticated cold weather modifications that aren't obvious to casual observers. Vikings would string canvas and leather barriers below decks to create smaller, more easily heated spaces. These temporary walls trapped warm air and blocked cold drafts, creating temperature differences of 20 to 30 degrees between different areas of the same ship. The most experienced Vikings could map the warm and cold zones of any ship within hours of boarding. Viking sleeping arrangements were engineered for maximum warmth sharing. They developed hammock and bedding systems that allowed multiple crew members to share body heat while maintaining enough personal space to avoid conflicts. The famous Viking sleep pile wasn't just about saving space. It was a sophisticated heat conservation technique that could keep an entire crew alive through the coldest nights. Vikings created portable shelter systems for use during shore landings in hostile weather. These shelters, made from ship sails and specially designed poles, could be erected quickly to provide immediate protection from wind and precipitation. The shelters were designed with multiple layers that created insulating air pockets, and they featured adjustable ventilation systems that prevented dangerous carbon dioxide buildup while maintaining warmth. The most ingenious Viking shelter technique involved their use of snow and ice as insulation materials. Vikings learned to build temporary shelters that incorporated snow walls for insulation. Understanding that snow could provide excellent thermal protection when used correctly, they developed techniques for creating ice windows that provided light while maintaining insulation. And they even learned to use frozen ground as thermal mass that could store and release heat. Viking strategic route planning. Avoiding the worst cold. Unlike military vessels that had to follow predetermined routes regardless of weather, Viking crews had the freedom to choose their paths based on seasonal conditions. This flexibility became one of their greatest advantages in cold weather survival. Vikings developed sophisticated seasonal migration patterns that took them to warmer waters during the harshest winter months. They understood ocean currents, seasonal wind patterns, and regional climate variations better than any other maritime culture of their time. Viking crews would begin moving south as early as September, timing their movements to stay ahead of the worst Arctic weather while maximizing their raiding and trading opportunities. The Vikings' famous exploration and settlement patterns were partly driven by their search for winter refuges. Their settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even North America were strategically located to provide warm harbors and sheltered anchorages during the coldest months. These weren't just trading posts, they were survival stations that allowed Viking crews to escape the deadly cold of open ocean voyages. Vikings became experts at reading weather patterns and predicting seasonal changes. They developed a sophisticated understanding of how ocean temperatures, wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions indicated approaching cold spells. This knowledge allowed them to time their voyages to avoid the worst weather, often arriving at their destinations just ahead of dangerous storms or temperature drops. The Vikings' flexible approach to voyage planning meant they could adapt their routes in real time based on changing conditions. Unlike other maritime cultures that followed rigid schedules, Vikings would alter their destinations, extend their stays in warm ports, or even completely change their mission objectives if weather conditions demanded it. This adaptability kept Viking crews alive when more rigid maritime cultures lost entire fleets to unexpected cold snaps. Viking navigation techniques were specifically adapted for cold weather conditions. They developed methods for reading ice formations, understanding how different types of sea ice indicated water temperature and weather patterns. Vikings could predict approaching storms by observing ice crystal formations in the air and they learned to use the behavior of Arctic wildlife as early warning systems for dangerous weather changes. The most sophisticated aspect of Viking route planning was their network of emergency shelters and supply caches. Vikings established hidden supply depots throughout their sailing routes, stocked with emergency food, fuel, and cold weather gear. These caches were strategically placed so that no Viking crew was ever more than 2 days sailing from emergency supplies. This network allowed Vikings to take calculated risks in dangerous waters, knowing they had backup resources if conditions turned deadly. Vikings also developed alliance systems with coastal communities that provided winter shelter in exchange for protection or trade goods. These relationships weren't just commercial arrangements, they were survival partnerships that gave Viking crews access to warm buildings, hot food, and dry clothing during the most dangerous winter months. The famous Viking reputation for both raiding and trading stemmed partly from their need to maintain these crucial cold weather relationships. These 7 Viking techniques represent more than just historical curiosities. They're a complete survival system developed by warriors who conquered the world's most dangerous waters. The Vikings proved that with the right knowledge, even the most brutal cold becomes conquerable. If you have enjoyed raiding the past with us, then go ahead and pillage that like button and subscribe for more interesting journeys into the world of Midgard living.